So, you think you're doing everything right. You think you're planning for your retirement. You've got it all covered, and you think that it's all going to work out for you. And then all of a sudden, you realize that there are the 5 worst enemies to your financial well-being, and maybe you didn't think of one of them. Okay, so in this podcast, we're going to be talking about all 5 of them to make sure that you don't miss one of them, because that could be the one that gets you.
Retirement Planners of America, RPOA.com.
Hello, and welcome back to the Retirement Planners of America podcast. I am Ken Moraif. I'm the founder and CEO of Retirement Planners of America. And we are very fortunate to be able to serve over 6,500 beautiful, wonderful families and all across the country. And you might have heard of our firm, and you may also have heard of our radio show, which we started doing in 1995, Money Matters with Ken Moraif, me. And the show, we were across the Southwest. But you know, in today's world, radio ain't the same thing no more. And so now we are doing our podcast, and I'm glad that you've tuned in again. Make sure you tune into all of them. Subscribe. So I want to kind of use an example of what we do with a client when they come in, and then as we do it on an ongoing basis, we create for them what we call a retirement cash flow plan. Okay, RCFP is what we call it for short. And in the retirement cash flow plan, we want to take into account the 5 worst enemies that we see to your financial well-being. So in the retirement cash flow plan, we want to address all 5 of the enemies and hopefully mitigate, if not eliminate, the effects of those 5 enemies. And unless you are able to consider these important elements, we don't think you will have an accurate picture of where you'll be 5 years, 10 years, 15, even 20 years down the road. So what are those 5 worst enemies to your financial well-being as we see them? Well, the first one is the person that you see in the mirror when you get up in the morning and you're brushing your teeth. Yeah, you potentially are the worst enemy to your own financial well-being. And so we want to talk about that. The other is longevity. You know, a lot of times people think that, they want to live, well, I think most of us want to live a long and healthy life. But believe it or not, that is actually an enemy to your financial well-being. And we'll explain that one. The other one, of course, is pretty obvious. Taxes. We want to mitigate taxes, lower them as much as possible. Inflation. We're in the middle of a lot of inflation, so I think I don't need to explain why inflation is one of the worst enemies to your financial well-being. And then finally, bear markets. And we as a firm believe that bear markets are the single worst enemy you have to your financial well-being. The other ones we think we can address with investments and other things, but bear markets need a strategy all by themselves to address it, and we'll go over that with you here in this podcast. So I hope you'll stay tuned for the entire program. So first of all, yourself. Let's talk about enemy number 1, yourself. You are subject to emotions. You're subject to fear. You're subject to greed. You're subject to indecision, impatience. So all of those things potentially can negatively impact your the decision making that you make, your financial well-being in the process. A lot of times people chase after whatever the hot soup du jour investment is at the time. Bitcoin, for example, .coms back in the day. There's always something that is the glittering, shiny object that people want. There's the, I want to recapture what I lost. So there's this emotion of staying in too long because you lost money and you want to recoup it. When really what you should be looking at is, where do I go from here? Is it a good investment to even have anymore? And cut your losses. Your emotions don't want you to fail. Your emotions want to protect you from feeling bad. And so you don't want to sell anything, right? So that's one thing also. When I say the person looking at you in the mirror, I also mean your health. And that's one of the most important things, actually, because if you're working with a financial advisor, hopefully what they'll do for you is they'll take you out of the picture. We always say we want you to enjoy your second childhood without parental supervision. What does that mean? We want you to go away, get out of here. Let us worry about all this for you so that you don't have to. So we should be able to take away the emotions and the greed and all that kind of stuff from you. But the one thing that is a fact of life is that as you get older, things happen. You know, there are health and other issues that could happen, and those could have a significant impact on your financial well-being. So it's important that we plan ahead for those things. You know, we believe that you hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. So let's plan for the worst, make sure we're addressing all these different things to the extent that we can, and then if they happen, then we're ready for them. But if they don't, then, you know, that's okay too. At least we planned for them and we're ready. So number one is you, the person you see in the mirror. The second one is longevity. Now this one seems strange because everybody says, you know, I think everybody says, I want to live a long and healthy life. I want to be active. You know, I want to stay engaged. I want to be mentally sharp, physically fit, and I want to live, you know, to be 100. Well, yes, that's a good thing to want. But when it comes to your money, if you retire when you're 60, and you're going to live a long and healthy, happy life until you're 100, guess what that means for your money? It means your money has to support you for those 40 years. And the more active you are, the more stuff you're doing, guess what that means? You got to spend money to do that. You know, and this is going to sound horrible, but that's as opposed to somebody who dies 5 years into their retirement. They probably haven't spent all their money yet. Okay? So longevity can be a significant danger to you if you don't plan ahead. And what we always do when we create the retirement cash flow plan, we always want to look far into the future beyond your life expectancy. Why? Because we want to plan for the worst, which is you live a long time. I know that sounds backward, but we want to be able to cover for that. The other thing also is that, you know, one of the things that we say is we want your money to last as long as you do. Okay, so if you're going to last a long time, we want your money to last as long as you do. And I'll tell you a funny story about that. When we first came up with that tagline, and we talked to clients about it, we thought that a better way to say it would be, we want your money to outlast you. And we had a significant number of our clients that said, no. The last check I write, I want it to bounce, okay? My job here is done. The kids can take care of themselves. So we said, all right, we're going to change it. How about we want your money to last as long as you do? Bingo. Like that one much better. So that's why we changed it. But certainly, if you want your money to last beyond you, we can plan for that as well. So let's go to enemy number 3, and that is income taxes. Now, you know, I guess it doesn't need a lot of explanation to tell you why income taxes, you know, are an enemy to your financial well-being. But one of the things that when you are retired that you need to be thinking about in terms of taxes is that you're in a different world now. You have a lot of different things than when you were working. You have Social Security. It's taxed differently than your wages were. You have required minimum distributions. If you have an IRA or those kind of things, you're going to be required to take money out of those plans. And if you take money out of those plans, most likely you're going to be paying taxes. So there are some strategies that we need to address in terms of how do we mitigate those taxes in the future. Roth IRA conversions is another idea that we work with clients about, meaning because Roth IRAs are tax-free going forward, right? So maybe it's worth paying the tax to put your money into a tax-free vehicle for the rest of your life. And then, I know I said a lot of clients don't care about leaving an inheritance. A Roth IRA is a fantastic inheritance. Imagine inheriting an IRA where the money you take out of it is tax-free. I mean, that's nirvana right there. It grows without being taxed and it comes out tax-free. What more could you want as an inheritance? That's wonderful. Okay, so we want to develop a tax-efficient withdrawal strategy for when you take your money from your investments as well. You know, you probably, when you retire, are going to have different kinds of money. And what I mean by that is you may have taxable money, which is not in your IRAs, your 401ks. You may have annuities. You may have life insurance with cash value in it. You may have 401ks or IRAs. So where do you take your money from first? Well, that's a very, very important decision because you want to take your money first. In our view, our philosophy is you want to delay paying taxes for as long as possible. Defer, defer, defer if you can. So the least taxed money is the money you take from your non-IRA accounts, okay? Because it's generally, hopefully, it's going to be taxed at capital gains rates. which currently are lower than ordinary income tax rates, which is what is taxed when you take money out of your retirement plans, okay? So, because they're more highly taxed, we want to leave those alone for as long as possible, unless we have a strategy to reduce that to avoid the required minimum distributions. So there's a lot of planning that goes into how you and where you take your money from so as to reduce or eliminate your income taxes. The other thing also is Social Security. There's a calculation when it comes to Social Security that is called your provisional income. So your provisional income is how they determine whether or not they're going to tax your Social Security benefits. And believe it or not, they will tax 85% of your Social Security benefits if you fall into that category. And there are strategies that can be employed to avoid that or reduce it. Okay, so it's important to look at that. So taxes, very, very important. And a lot of the things that affect you from an income tax standpoint are going to be different once you have retired, you're on Social Security, and you're taking money to live on, et cetera, than when you were working. And so you're in a whole new paradigm now. And that's where, because we specialize in that area, that's where we can help you the most from that standpoint. Our retirement planners are all trained in all of these different strategies to bring those to bear if they're needed and if they are appropriate. Okay, so let's go to number 4, inflation. You know, for a long time, inflation was nowhere, right? We had inflation at 2% for a really long time. And we got used to it. We kind of thought, you know, what's inflation? We don't even know what that is, right? I mean, 2%, that's nothing. And so the idea that you had to have a strategy to address inflation was always, you know, it's always something that we've done, because when we build your retirement cash flow plan, we think you should always assume a high inflation rate. Now, if it doesn't turn out that way, that's okay. Okay, what we like to say is we're going to create a semi-worst case scenario. The idea being that if you're okay under that scenario with a higher inflation rate than what's actually happening, you'll be okay if it's lower. Okay, so we want to take that into account. But the other thing about inflation is that it's insidious. You know, in a lot of cases, recently less so, but because it's a little bit at a time, it's like the old thing, you know, how do you boil a frog, you know, a little at a time so it doesn't jump out. That's what inflation does. It gradually raises your cost of living over time, and it's a very insidious enemy. Now, you know, in the past, and this is probably, Jeremy, we should probably think about this for a future podcast, but what is the best tool to use to fight inflation with? You've probably seen a million television ads and other things that tell you that gold is the one. Well, I'm going to take issue with that. Let me tell you why. Where gold got the big reputation for being the big inflation fighter was back in the 80s. So what happened in the 80s is we had runaway inflation, the worse than now. We had runaway unemployment, worse than now. It was a terrible, terrible time. Our economy was on its back. And with inflation that high, gold did phenomenally well. And so that's where people said, aha, high inflation, gold. The truth is that if you look at going all the way back, if you go back 100 years and you look at it, gold is not the best inflation fighter. It isn't. And what it is a fear fighter. When people are scared, they buy gold. So it was coincidental. In the 80s, they were very scared. Our economy was on its back. We were about to become a second-rate nation. And so what did people do? They bought gold because they were scared. So in times of fear, which sometimes is when we have inflation, gold does well. But they're not buying it because of the inflation. They're buying it because they're scared. Historically, what is the best inflation fighter? It's the stock market. Why? Because as inflation heats up, what do companies do? What is inflation? They're raising prices. Why? Because they want to keep their margins. You know, if they sell something for $100 and they make $5 every time they sell it, if the cost of now it's $200, they want to make $10. It's the same 5% profit, but they want to keep those margins. So as their profit goes up with inflation, their profits are inflated, and therefore their stock price gets inflated. So what does inflation do? It inflates the stock market, and we've seen it. right? That's what's happened here during this inflationary period, after the initial shock. So anyway, long discussion, but inflation is a very important thing to address, and having the right amount of stock market in your portfolio once you retire is extremely important. And again, our retirement cash flow plan helps us to determine how much risk is appropriate for you, right? We want to know what rate of return we need to earn to drive the income you're going to need for the rest of your life. And once we've determined that, that'll help us to say, this is how much stock market you should have. So you start, in our view, with how much risk do I need to take, how much return do I need to cover for inflation, to cover for taxes, to cover for the things we've talked about. And once you've done that, only then, in our view, are you able to then decide how much stock market you should have, okay? Now, I want to get into the fifth one, which we believe is the single worst enemy you have to your financial well-being, and that is bear markets. And if you go back and you look at, according to Ned Davis research, and you look at the last 100 years, we've had 33 bear markets during that time. So that averages out to about 1 every 3 years. Now it's lumpy, you know, we could go, 7 years without one, and then we get 2 in a row, but over time, it's about 1 every 3 years. And the average drop in a bear market, and again, a bear market, to define our terms, is a drop of more than 20% in an investment. In this case, we're talking about the stock market, the S&P 500 index. So the average drop in the market over these 33 bear markets is 37%. Okay, 37%. And the reason why we think that that's the single worst enemy you have is because investing and diversification, in our view, is not enough. We went through 2008 with our clients, and as you may know, we had our clients out of the stock market for all of 2008. The reason why is because our belief system is that growth is important, but protection of principal is even more important. You gotta protect the nest egg that's gonna drive the income that you're gonna live on for the rest of your life, in our view. And bear markets, in the blink of an eye, in a very short period of time, can have you lose 37% or more. Okay, in Y2K, the market went down 49%, and in 2008, it went down 57%. The Great Depression, it went down over 90%. And the problem with bear markets is that you've probably heard what we call a buy, hold myth, which is, don't worry about it, okay? The market always comes back. All you have to do is buy and hold and play through, and everything's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. Okay, fine. The problem with that, though, is that where's the guarantee that says the market is going to come back? I haven't seen the contract that the stock market has that you just sign it and it says, I will always come back. Now, in our history, we've been fortunate that it has come back, but there are many places where it hasn't. Japan, for example, they had a big bad bear in the 80s. Their stock market still has not gotten back to even. But, a lot of people say, well, that's Japan. That's not the good old US of A. We're different. We don't, the laws of economics don't apply to us. We're different. Okay, fine. So let's look at the Great Depression. What happened during the Great Depression? Well, the stock market went down 90% in 1929 during that bear market. It bottomed around 3 years later. How long do you think it took to get back to even? It wasn't till 1954. Okay, 25 years is how long it took for the stock market to get back to even. Now, I hope every one of our clients lives 25 years during their retirement so they can sit around and wait until their investments get back to even so that they can start spending the money that they retired with again. No, that's a terrible idea. Okay, and the other problem with it is that if you're living on your money, okay, the stock market in that scenario took 25 years. Let me give you a more recent example, Y2K. All right, so during that period, from Y2K, it went down, it came all the way back up, and it wasn't until 2007-ish where it got back to even. Glory, hallelujah, buy, hold worked. We're back to even. That's great. But guess what happened? 2008 came right after that, and the market went down again. And it wasn't until 2013 before it got back to where it was in Y2K, in January of 2000. So basically, it was 13 years. Now, during that 13 years, it got back to even. But if you're living on your money, You're spending that whole time. And when the market's going down and you're selling investments into a down market, you're doing what farmers call eating your seed corn. And if you do enough of that, guess what? Growth season may come back, but you may not have any seed to plant when it does. So in our view, having a strategy to address that, particularly if you're over 50, we consider the 5 years before you retire and the 5 years after you retire to be the single most important decade of your entire financial life. Now, why do I say that? Well, let's say you've been the world's greatest investor. You have made 20% every single year for 20 years in a row. In fact, you are a legend, okay? Warren Buffett calls you to ask to come over to your house to get tips on how to invest. There is a statue of you, like on Wall Street, a bronze statue, and all the traders, when they walk by, they rubbed the foot of your statue because they want to get some of your luck and be as good as you were for 20 years in a row, where you made 20% every single year. Wow, you've amassed a mighty fortune. And now you want to retire, and the Great Depression hits, and you lose 90% of all the money you have. Or Y2K shows up, and you lose 57%. Or 2008, and you lose 49%. I guarantee you, no matter how much money you have, if you lose half of it, you're going to feel that. And you may not be able to retire like you wanted to, and you may not be able to stay retired if you're already retired. And the problem with that is now you got to go back to work. And how are you going to do that? You've been retired for 5 years. Your skills have atrophied. They've hired somebody to replace you already. So bear markets are extremely dangerous. We can invest our way, we think, with inflation. We can manage against taxes. We can manage there's a lot of things we can do with those things. But for bear markets, we believe you need to have a separate strategy that is kind of like an overlay. It sits on top of everything. So even though we may have decided this is how much stock market you should have to fight inflation, and this is your tax strategy, and this is your inflation strategy, we got all that. You need, in our view, to have another strategy that overlays everything and says, you know what, there's going to be a time when I'm going to get out, I'm going to sell, I'm going to take my marbles and go home. Was it Kenny Rogers that said, you got to know when to hold them, and you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them? Right. He's right. Everybody knows. Even professional traders have a strategy to sell. They know when it's time to sell. But the retail investor, doesn't. You're told, buy, hold forever. Don't ever get out, no matter what happens. Even if you're going to be underwater for 25 years, the market will come back. You'll be 90, but it will come back. Okay, so in our company, we have a strategy for that. As I mentioned, we were out in 2008. We were out during the latter part of the pandemic. We were out during the inflation shock, the latter part of that as well. Our Invest and Protect strategy is designed to address and mitigate, hopefully, the effects of major bear markets. And if you're over 50, retired, or retiring soon, we think it's paramount. It's the single worst enemy we see to your financial well-being. So, in conclusion, what did we have here? The 5 enemies to your financial well-being: yourself, longevity, taxes, inflation, bear markets. And it's very important in our view that you plan for the worst and you hope for the best. You don't plan for the best and hope the worst doesn't happen. We think that's a bad investment strategy. So, if you enjoyed this video, this podcast, I encourage you to subscribe to our channel, subscribe to our podcast. Tell everybody that Retirement Planners of America podcast is up and running. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk soon.
Retirement Planners of America, RPOA.com.